We cannot fear change, cannot turn our heads from it. This we know and always must know deep within our heart roots. Sometimes the change comes from outside forces, the passing of a season or the death of a loved one. Other times this change comes from within ourselves, a need to shake away an old identity and embrace a new one. So we require the aid of the Hist. Though the Hist watch over the tribe and guide us along our needed paths, rarely does it take direct action. But during this time, Hist and Spirit combine, a loving embrace followed by a great change. The Hist trees have dwelt on Tamriel since the very beginning, since Anu the Everything assembled the 12 worlds of creation. They stood by, swaying idly in the wind as the predecessors to men and elves warred over the land of Dawn's beauty. The Hist gathered knowledge like water through their roots, absorbing invaluable sustenance that they could use to better understand their homeland, even as much of it sank into the sea. The Elnathay evolved and changed after their primordial conflicts, and by the time of the Men and Mer, they had lost much of what connected them to the forces of the Dawn times. But while the past is opaque for mortals, the Hist seem to remember. They know of Sithis' role in the creation of the universe, and they revere him as the original creator. Without Sithis, the void, the chaos, there was no reaction, nothing for Anwiel to interplay with. Therefore the Hist, and subsequently the Argonians, have an intrinsic link to the forces of chaos, a veneration that brings understanding. But how does this manifest in reality? Well, while the races of man, mer and beast can trace their lineage back to the Elnathay in some way or another, the Argonians are unique. They owe their existence to the Hist, not the Divines, or the Daedra, or the eventual devolution of the Elnathay. The parable of becoming speaks of an allegory used to explain why Argonians look the way they do. It claims that the Hist perceived humans and elves, and admired their walking legs and clever hands, and then moulded and remoulded the swamp's useful lizards until they found they had made Argonians. Scholars have also speculated from their interpretations of the parable that the Hist created the Argonians from an existing lizard of Blackmarsh, specifically the Hellstrom ancestor lizard, as it is commonly known in modern times. One Argonian named Mir Glim had a vision of the distant past, and described the condensed life of a lizard. It wandered listlessly, in the blasé, nonchalant way that only a simple, thoughtless creature can. It ate the small things that moved in its vicinity, grubs and flies and beetles, that could not identify the camouflaged predator. It drank the thick murky waters of the mires, and then one day it drank something entirely different, something strong and strangely sapid, Hist sap. And then, in his transient trip, Mir Glim experienced the intricate transformation from lizard to Argonian, eons of evolution in mere moments. It's no coincidence that such a miraculous transformation was only possible with the celestial power of the Hist that enters the tangible world in the form of sap. It seems that, of all the inhabitants of Tamriel during the Dawn times, the Hist did not lose their omnipotent powers. The old and wandering Elnathay became mortal. The Aedra tied up a great deal of their divine essence in keeping the mortal realm of Mundus alive. But the Hist, they just watched, and waited for the forces of stasis and change to finish their feuding. It's difficult to pinpoint exactly how powerful the Hist are, as they do not communicate with mortals, and when they do, it's in esoteric ways, through hallucinations and complex rituals. But it is entirely possible that their powers have not wavered since the moment they were created by Anu, and if the Hist are powerful enough to turn a living, but non-intelligent lifeform like the ancestor lizard into the sapient Argonians, deciding the details of their biology seemingly on a whim, then the Hist could theoretically alter the lizard folk any way they please, transmogrifying them into any form, defying the laws of nature, embracing Sithis' chaos. And when we delve into the rituals and customs of the Argonians, this possibility seems much more plausible. That's what we're going to explore in this video. Hey guys, it's Drew here, and welcome back to FudgeMuppet. Can the Argonians shapeshift? Let's find out. The intimate relationship between Hist and Argonian begins even before birth. When a pair of Argonians mate, the female lays a clutch of eggs, and these eggs are transferred to a nest called an uxif. And these nests are usually located in hatching pools, made among the shallow exposed roots of the Hist trees. The closer Argonian eggs can be to the Hist during incubation, the better. Here, where the eggs can be exposed to raw Hist sap, Argonian embryos are practically gestated in Hist sap. And when they hatch, the first thing they will eat is not milk, but Hist sap. Even the pacifiers given to teething youths are made from hardened sap. Argonians tickled under the chin will reflexively open their jaws, and this allows for parents to feed hatchlings the sap, as well as licorice worms, which are nutrient-dense and easy to chew. The importance of the hist to a developing Argonian cannot be understated. For Argonians born in other provinces, the ramifications are much more significant than simply homesickness and a different accent. Firstly, Argonians from foreign lands have trouble communicating with Black Marsh natives, largely because the body language and reliance on instinctive gestures are as vital to their language as the words themselves. In the text, The Strange Case of Jar Reet, we hear of an Argonian born away from the marsh. It says, in Argonian society, he is disadvantaged. He's unable to read social clues, the subtle movements of muscle and tail that most of us take for granted. We occasionally have difficulty reading the emotions of other races. Jar Reet has that problem, even with fellow Argonians. He listens to spoken words, and is insensitive to their tone. Surely being born away from the hist has deprived him of emotional intuition. But beyond culture and communicating, you'd think that there would be genuine physiological drawbacks to growing up without the hist. But their adaptability makes that hard to properly gauge. The beautiful thing about Argonians is that they adapt remarkably well to unfavourable circumstances. In extreme conditions like the frigid reaches of Skyrim, Argonians can bear children like mammals, become pregnant and give birth to their youth, bypassing the egg-laying process altogether. This somewhat controversial take on how Argonians give birth comes from some of the many developer interviews. Both Mark Nelson and Pete Hines of Bethesda Softworks have said that Argonian breasts provide Argonian infants with a source of hist sap when a hist tree is not available. This ability for Argonians to suddenly change their biology to suit their environment is not only astonishing, but it only just scratches the surface of what they can do. Imagine if I told you that Imperials who spent long enough in a tropical climate could switch to laying eggs. Imagine seeing a baby human hatch. It's unfathomable. Argonians, however, can quickly undergo millions of years of evolution, depending on their proximity to the hist hive mind. You have to wonder why this phenomenon isn't researched by human and elven scholars more often. Unfortunately, they're chalked off as primitive beasts so flippantly that the most sophisticated debates had over Argonians is whether or not to enslave them. The Ultima scholar, Sirantil, is one of the few academics who can see the potential of studying the hist in Argonian biology. In an excerpt of her work titled On Argonians, she writes, "In studying the various races of Tamriel, I have found a few strange aberrations. Among the human-shaped, the Argonians may be the most fascinating. They are cold-blooded in both the physiological and psychological sense, and yet they somehow manage to operate in all climes with the same resilience as mammals. Their preference for subtropical and tropical climates notwithstanding, to see an Argonian moving through subarctic or arctic regions with the same facility as their mammalian rivals is simply astounding. While most other Altmeri scholars simply choose to ignore this oddity, I chose to delve into it, and I believe I've discovered its cause. The Argonians maintain they are connected to a mystical force known as the hist. As religious beliefs go, it is not terribly complicated, but I believe it has a physical manifestation as well. The hist supposedly emanates from all nature in Tamriel, but is particularly strong in hist trees, large, usually ancient growths found at the centre of every sizable Argonian settlement. These hist trees contain, the Argonians believe, the collective memories and knowledge of all Argonians. Whether this is true or not, the sap that flows from a hist tree contains concentrated magicka. I believe that it is this hist sap that gives the Argonians the ability to defy the logical limits of their own physiology. And Sirantil is right to ponder the untapped potential of hist sap. Argonians feel a connection to the hist in their subconscious minds at all times. They ingest the sap from birth to death. At birth, Argonians claim the initial consumption of the sap gives the hatchling its soul. Throughout their lives, the hist communicate telepathically with the Argonians through visions. Some of these divine reveries, especially the ones granted by the consumption of deep sap found deep under the topsoil, are so vivid that they blur the lines of real and imagined. In more remote tribes, shamans give the deep sap to young Argonians, so that they may partake in coming-of-age challenges. These rites of passage can involve dream beasts, called Karju, that must be slain, or even bizarre psychedelic mental exercises. There are rumours that the deep sap is so potent that it allows the hist to manifest objects in the physical world. When Argonians die, their souls return whence they came. The life essence and memories of the individual join the hive mind, absorbed like moisture into the roots of the hist, and the Argonian spirit enriches the hist sap for the next generation of hatchlings to drink. But as we just heard from Sarantil, and the examples of Argonian mothers adapting their reproductive organs to suit the climate, the influence of the hist via hist sap goes far beyond hallucinations and mere sustenance. Argonians can be changed physically by the sap, just as the sap had once transformed the ancestor lizards into the lizard folk. At the top of the video I quoted a grand transformation, a text detailing the process of an Argonian changing gender. They refer to their genders as life phases, suggesting that it is commonplace to change often. The process, according to Sarantil, involves finding a nearby hist tree and licking sap from its bowl. The elements in the sap then quicken the hormonal glands, which sprout appropriate organs from which the Argonian's gender can be determined. The physical permutations go beyond biological sex, and another example of hist sap being used to change an Argonian's shape is during the Oblivion crisis. After the hist warned the lizard folk of the impending cataclysm, the trees altered the race to be stronger, faster, and more resilient. This, combined with the knowledge of the invasion, gave the Argonians the upper hand, and allowed them to fend off the Daedra hordes, even going so far as to chase them back into the Deadlands. The races of Men and Mer revere their gods, the Aedra. In some instances, the Aedra are considered ancestors, shining examples of what mortals once were and long to be again. In others, the gods are unlike them, but still credited with the creation of the mortal races. However the elves and humans perceive their gods, it is always the case that the gods are difficult, if not impossible, to commune with. And when the gods do involve themselves in mortal affairs, it is in a powerfully meaningful, albeit fleeting way, like Akatosh's avatar manifesting as a golden dragon to derail Dagon's dastardly designs. For the Argonians, though, contact with their gods, their creators, is simple, and you could even argue that they are but an extension of the hist's will, meaning every conscious thought they have comes to them from their gods. The Argonians haven't been left to fend for themselves like the other races have. So long as the lizards keep a close connection to the roots, they will be protected and adapted to whatever travails they face. And with this in mind, the other races of Tamriel are incredibly fortunate that the hist have a reputation for being bystanders. What if the hist wished for the Argonians to rule Tamriel? What if they wanted to reclaim Dawn's beauty for the true natives of the continent? How could any army face a united race of shape-shifting lizards? They are currently humanoid in form because the hist admired those traits about the old and wandering Elnathay. But if they wanted the Argonians to conquer every corner of the continent, then they need only feed them the sap and transform them into colossal beasts capable of slaying 100,000 men. The hist seem more interested in preserving what's theirs than taking from others. They've tolerated centuries of Argonian slavery in Morrowind, and it's only recently that the hist have felt the need to retaliate against the historic scourge of the lizard folk. Both the hist and by extension the Argonians venerate Siphis as the original creator, the darkness that made shape of the blinding ineffable light. And this is perfectly suited to the race's ability to alter their psychology and take on new and limitless physical forms. Siphis is the primordial force of chaos and change, and as befits his flock, the lizards can undergo immense change with the aid of the hist trees. Men and elves worship Anu, the primordial force of stasis, and all of his direct descendants like Anwiel, Auriel, and Akatosh. These races are limited to Anu's order and permanence. The Argonians are not. Chaos is formless and unpredictable, prone to rapid and radical change. So too are the lizard folk. In the words of the historian Brendan the Persistent, the Argonian people have, throughout Tamrielic history, been perhaps the most misunderstood, vilified, and reviled of all the sentient races. Yet those who have taken the time to experience Argonian culture have gained a greater appreciation for this noble and beautiful people. I think that if people understood just how much potential the Argonians have, they would be less hasty to vilify and revile them as subhuman sub-elven beasts. In the Fourth Era, we've seen unprecedented aggression from the Argonians. As of the present day, year 201, Blackmarsh is more prosperous than ever before, and thanks to the Anzaleel political faction, the Argonians even rule a significant chunk of southern Morrowind, the land upon which many of their kin were enslaved. Neither the Empire or the Dunmer were able to reclaim the territories in the following years. Could this era be the time of the lizards? Will the Argonians put their divine powers of transformation to use, or will they settle for the maintenance of their isolated corner of Tamriel? Whatever the answer may be, only a fool would underestimate just how powerful the Argonians could become. But there you have it, guys, the secret power of the Argonians, that seems to go almost entirely unnoticed by the other races of Tamriel. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks so much for watching. I've been Drew, this has been FudgeMuppet, and I'll see you in the next one.